We're in the midst of some major astrological aspects currently happening. In Capricorn especially, we've just had in January, now it's early April to 2020. In January the 12th, we had a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which doesn't happen very often. They're in opposition, so halfway around the orbit, at about the time of 2001, Twin Towers, when the world was duped into believing that external criminals, foreign barbarians at the gate, were attacking our civilization, when in fact, once the hype and the fear-mongering and the panic subsided, lots and lots of evidence emerged to show that was, I think as the Constitution says, enemies internal as well as external. And so we're at a similar point now, 2020, where the world is in a similar panic situation. And that Plutonian-Saturn conjunction, where it's done its final balsamic phase of its orbit over the last 20 years and got to a conjunction, suggests from an astrological perspective that a new energy has arrived. So in reflection to 20 years ago, we're now at this point where Saturn, the faster of the two planets, although fast is not really a word from our relative perspective here on Earth that one might associate with a planet that takes 30 years to do a nodal orbit. But it's caught up with Pluto, which takes, 250 years to do, maybe more, to do a lap of the zodiac. And that's happened in Capricorn, towards the end of Capricorn. And these are way out planets. They are a long, long way away from Earth. So let's just have a little moment to have a think about, how that distance could have any influence on, little old us down here on planet Earth. Well, you got to get to electromagnetism, and here on the 3D world, we're living in a Newtonian billiard ball, building blocks, separate entities, bumping around and rough and tumbling into each other, this kind of thing. And that doesn't make an awful lot of sense. How could, an enormous celestial planetary orb, all those many hundreds and thousands of miles away, have anything to do with our, how could it influence us here on Earth? Well, let's just go with the moon for a second. The moon has electromagnetic, gravitational powers and forces and properties that can shift the entire ocean. We are a high percentage, 70% water. So that very much suggests that if it can pull and push the ocean back and forth as it does, then the moon, probably has an effect on our fluidity, our water content. Go a little further out, you get to the sun. I don't think there's any doubt that the sun has influence on our lives here on Earth. Perhaps not a 3D physical influence in terms of, bumping into us, say, for example. But you get into the outer dimensions, you move into a multi-dimensional area, and these environments, these cradles of electromagnetism, light, audio harmonics, this kind of thing, all part of the electromagnetic frequency. So bearing in mind, those two obvious ones, the moon and the sun, having this effect on us here on Earth, it's a possibility, even for the most skeptical mind, that other celestial planetary orbs similarly have an effect on us here on Earth. And this is where astrology comes in, and, for example, masculine assertive energies come from a personal perspective from the planet Mars. Inversely, from a feminine yin as opposed to Mars yang, receptive, holistic, no, let's not go there. Perspective, energetic influence. We have Venus. You know, these are definite fields of energy, not physical, not material, but masculinity and femininity do certainly come from somewhere with regards to motivations and forces and drives. And so each planet has characteristics, and each sector of the 12 zodiac signs have characteristics according to astrology. And what we're looking at now in terms of this conjunction is a question mark as to what is this new. If you think of it like a wine glass with wine in it, and you wet your finger and you circle the rim, it makes a harmonic, a frequency, an echo. And so that metaphor on a solar system grand scale works fairly well, I personally think. And these, in an ocean of plasma, which is space, these harmonics and frequencies and waveforms and audio tides interact with each other and create oceans of or currents of data. Birkeland currents is an interesting area to look at if you're interested in this sort of thing. These are even intergalactic, big kind of highways of consciousness with a capital C, but intelligent data that move these electromagnetic frequencies on vast distances, you know, in terms of light years we're talking about here. And this is singing in a choral orchestral perspective. Our planet here on Earth has a Hertz frequency at rest 7.83. You know, this can vary depending on certain conditions, particularly what the sun's doing. But the Schumann resonance for here on Earth, Gaia, or whatever label you would like to give her, is 7.83 Hertz. Although that has been interestingly fluctuating higher recently. And similarly, all the other planets have their own song, like a whale in an ocean would have a whale song. And these Hertz frequencies, metaphysical waveforms, must, I posit, have some effect. So, on the topic of singing, orchestral harmonies, seventh dimensional, I believe harmonics would be. We have the planet Neptune, and it is the envoy of Pisces, the quadrant of the zodiac, or the zonal area of the zodiac, instead of quadrant, which would suggest 4. If you've got a dodecahedron for 12, a decadent, a descant. Anyway, the 12th of the whole 360 degree zodiac is Pisces, and currently the envoy of Pisces, Neptune, the planet. So if you're thinking about that wine glass circling, creating that echo or harmonic from the wine with the moistened finger around the rim, the finger would be Neptune, and when it's at that area of Pisces sector, it would be at its most vital, its most invigorated. So here we have Howard Sasportas' book, The 12 Houses. Fortunately, Howard Sasportas is no longer with us anymore, but a terrific writer, and there's a great book. And so the chapter is Neptune and Pisces through the houses, and we're looking at Neptune in the 12th, because in the zodiac, Aries would be the first house. Happy astrological new year, by the way, as we just arrived in Aries. And you go 12 signs around and you get to Pisces, which would, in an orthodox way, be the 12th house, Pisces. But your own individual ones would move depending on your time of birth during the day, whichever whichever sign was on the horizon, your elliptical point, when you were born would be your first house, and then you'd follow your own individual 12 around, creating a certain dimensional quality of a variety of your houses, how they fit in with your signs and planets. So anyway, here's Neptune the 11th. So Neptune the 12th. So Neptune is currently sitting almost smack bang in the middle of Pisces, and it's a slow mover, 270 odd years on an elliptical nodal orbit around the sun on the solar system, and it's got about 17 years, is it, in Pisces. So very, very potent and powerful in its home headquarters positional sign. Neptune is strong in its own house, where the very best or the very worst qualities of this planet may manifest. Those with this placement will be highly sensitive to undercurrents, movements, and unseen forces in the atmosphere. Sometimes they are more aware of these levels than what is actually happening on the surface level of life. So again, that third dimensional surface level of life, as opposed to these much, much higher dimensions where the oceanic, very spiritual, emotional, metaphysical realms of Neptune and Pisces inhabit. Sometimes they are more aware of these levels than what is actually happening on the surface level of life. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Neptune in the 12th house in Taurus, the late Jesuit priest who has inspired many people with his mystical vision of all life culminating in an omega point of spiritual union, wrote that awareness can return to the point where the roots of matter disappear from view. At times, their uncanny vision can be confusing. They see or are told one thing, and yet feel or sense something quite different occurring. So there's a multidimensional, multifaceted, multi-perspective characteristic with Neptune, often associated with illusions and delusions. There's a lot of fantasy going on, Hollywood and tales of imagination, very connected with the Neptunian energies. Some may be victimized by their own unconscious, that is, periodically swamped or overwhelmed by emotions and feelings which others have an easier time keeping at bay. Montgomery Clift was born with Neptune in the 12th. He had all the Neptunian acting talent and the glamour that goes with it. But he also suffered from severe guilt and depression he couldn't control, and consequently turned to drink and drugs as an escape route. A few people I know with this placement have reported experiences in which they felt their ego boundaries dissolving and their ordinary lensing of life go out of focus. For some, this was welcomed as a mystical or peak experience, but for others, the experience was accompanied by disarming and frightening sensations of chaos and invasion. So again, characteristics of Neptune can be the hallucinogenic areas, the trance-like areas. So, with this can go on a sort of axis continuum spectrum, all the way from very debilitating and dangerous substance abuse, all the way along to deep mystical meditative areas. This multi-layered question of what is real. Neptune is oceanic, right? And where are the coasts is an interesting question. Where are the boundaries to this enormous, vast expanse of emotional water, spiritual bodies of fluidity? I just thought I'd mention there's one sea called the Wide Sargasso Sea. I think it's in the Western Atlantic, not too far from the Caribbean, and that is the sea without any coasts. I sort of feel that's very appropriate for a conversation about Neptune. If Neptune is not too adversely aspected, the unconscious mind can serve as a source of guidance or inspiration, allowing access to the inner wise person. There is an openness to the archaic memory of earlier forms of evolution, and they can draw on this reverse and they can draw on this reserve of stored information with startling effect, as if they have wisdom and insight into experiences of which they have had no first-hand knowledge, sort of intuition. They may be an interest in the philosophy of karma and reincarnation, and possibly the belief that they are in touch with some of their previous lives. Understood properly, this could help them in more meaningfully meeting the present life. So one of the shadow side kind of troubles with Neptune is, too out there, too cosmic, ungrounded, uncentered. Get your feet on the floor would perhaps be a good advice for someone with very strong Neptune Pisces aspects. However, for some with displacement, dwelling on past lives could be a way of avoiding facing what is in front of them right now. Fantasizing about when they were Cleopatra or Joan of Arc might also add a bit of glamour to an otherwise dull existence, but it remains to be seen to what constructive use they put such beliefs. So again, this sort of Hollywood idea, this glitz and glamour, can send the Neptunian interest, motivations, away, lost in the Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs of what could be or what might be, as opposed to nuts and bolts what is really happening here. No judgment, but this Saturn perhaps would be the antithesis of this Neptunian journeying. Neptune in the 12th can denote very strong escapist tendencies. Daydreams or fantasies can swallow them whole, and they might retreat from life by creating their own little worlds in which to live. For most people with this placement, times of seclusion and withdrawal will be necessary in order to recenter and cleanse themselves of the psychic smog which has been absorbed and accumulated from interaction with others. One extreme of Neptune in the 12th may be those who feel they have no control whatsoever over what happens to them, what some psychologists call an external locus of control. While Neptune asks that we acknowledge a greater authority than ourselves, a total denial of personal power and responsibility is not a healthy situation, and is best kept in check wherever this planet is placed. Studies have linked depression and various other forms of psychopathology with people who feel that they have lost the influence to direct their lives. Perhaps very poignant for where we are currently under house arrest. 3 billion around the globe, I believe, because of this media, political narrative. Similar to Venus in the 12th, those with Neptune here suffer because the world doesn't always live up to their expectations of what it could be. While they are hurt by the lack of beauty in the world, it is also possible that their sensitivity to beauty can be a means of their own self-healing. Beauty has a regenerative effect on the psyche. If they can make time in their lives to dwell on a sunset, linger by the sea on a night when the stars are visible, meditate in a chapel while the light shines through a stained glass window, or go to a gallery to view their favourite painting, they can often revitalise their own world-weary psyches. So there's a lovely aspect of beauty to Neptune. It's very beautiful, this Pisces-Neptune archetype. As Piero Ferrucci writes in What We May Be, in those moments a victory occurs over discouragement, a positive affirmation against resigning ourselves to the process of crystallization and death. In other words, those people with Neptune in the 12th do have a choice whether to see beauty or not. Beauty also has a self-transcending and revelatory power, opening Neptune in the 12th to new worlds and possibilities which others may not be able to glimpse. Taking responsibility to look for beauty in life will not miraculously erase all their problems, but it can lighten their load and balance out a tendency to err on the side of dissatisfaction. Teilhard de Chardin, Neptune in Taurus in the 12th, also wrote that the aim of evolution is ever more perfect eyes in a world in which there is always more to see. Performing service is another way of freeing the self from pain and unhappiness and giving meaning to life. Again, some common sense is required. Some with this placement may throw themselves totally into other people's lives as a way of avoiding their own. Nonetheless, Neptune in the 12th could do very effective work within hospitals or institutions. Others may be found employed in museums, libraries, and art galleries, which protect and preserve the wisdom, beauty, and riches of past and present. Those with Neptune in the 12th might meditate on Jung's idea that certain problems in life can never be solved, but only outgrown. Some new interest or vision arises, and through this widening of view, the insoluble problem loses its urgency. On one level, we are caught in a storm, but viewing it from a different level shifts our perspective, like being on a mountaintop, viewing the storm in the valley. The thunderstorm is still there and still has relevance, but we are now above it. Those with Neptune in the 12th will have to learn to accept the good with the bad, the perfect with the imperfect, and the beautiful with the ugly. You can't have one without the other. It helps if they can remember and reflect on what is known as Wittgenstein's dictum. The solution to the problem of life is seen in the vanishing of the problem. The solution of the problem of life is seen in the vanishing of the problem. So I guess the point is, take a higher perspective. You know, you can get caught in the duality of the third dimension, good, bad, right, wrong, ugly, beautiful, blah, blah, blah. But if you can rise your perspective up to this Newtonian, higher, multi-dimensional viewpoint, perhaps that holistic peace can wash over you like those deep, vast, oceanic, Neptunian, Piscean oceans of spirit.